Okay, test. Does that sound good? Cool.
Yeah, don't turn it off.
I won't turn it
Don't
off.
turn these. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. But let me introduce you guys real fast. If you don't remember, my brother Paul, he came and preached here a year ago,
Year and a half,
year
yeah.
and a half. And what my brother Paul's been doing is in the ministry and in the work of abolishing abortion in Texas. And here at Faith Family Church, of course, we stand by the truth and what is good and what is right. And so we as a church are unapologetically for ending abortion, ending that great sin in our country in any way that we can help. And so my brother, since he's an expert in this particular field, and he does this, he goes around, he speaks at churches about this particular thing. We put this on the calendar a while back, like, hey, why don't you come out to Faith Family and talk about it? So he'll be talking about that. He'll be answering questions you guys might have. And I guess that's really it. So
Cool. Thanks. Well, let me start by just praying real quick. Dear God, I thank you so much for this beautiful day that you've given us. We thank you for the gift of your son, Jesus. Let us never forget the greatness of your son and what he has done for us. God, we thank you for the gift of life and for making every human in your image and imparting upon us immeasurable, infinite value. I pray that you would help us to honor that life well, our own lives and the lives of others and the lives of those who are imperiled, the preborn. I pray that you would work in me and through me today to speak truth, to speak it well, and that you would work in the hearts of everyone here. Show us what it is that we must do and how we can love our preborn neighbors well. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thanks for being here. Again, I'm Paul Brown, David's brother. I did speak here about a year and a half ago. At that time, I was with an organization called Love Life USA. And that was a confusing name a lot of times. People say, I'm with Love Life. They're like, Love Life? No. We love life. And that our organization was focused on trying to work with churches to get them more involved to help the least of these, the preborn. And one of the things that we did, and some of y'all came out with us, is we would go to abortion centers and pray and try to, as directly and as head-on as we could, address the culture of death that is so pervasive in our nation. And so some of y'all got to come out with me last spring, and we sang and we prayed together right there at an abortion center in Dallas. And several months later, that abortion center and all the abortion centers in Texas closed, which was literally an answer to prayer, and a prayer that some of us got to share together at that time. And so we're grateful for that, and I'm genuinely grateful for the closure of abortion facilities in Texas, but there's also a lot more work to be done, and I'll speak to the details of that soon. But first, I just want to give you all an update. So like I said, last time I was here, I was with Love Life. But when the laws in Texas did change last year, you know that the United States Supreme Court made a decision known as the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. And that decision at the federal level allowed the state of Texas to put into effect a law which they had actually previously passed called the Texas Abortion Trigger Ban. And that was basically a law that said, hey, in the event that Roe v. Wade is ever gone, this new law in Texas goes into effect. And what that law did is it made it a felony for a doctor or really anyone in Texas to conduct an abortion upon a woman. And so all the abortion centers at that time closed, within a few months in Texas and across several other states in the nation with similar laws. But unfortunately, abortion itself was not completely banned in Texas. So the way the laws in Texas are written, women who have an abortion, they actually have complete legal immunity under the law. That means that I'll kind of paint two pictures for you, two examples. The first example was the old way that most women in Texas would get abortions. They would go to the abortion center, they would see the abortionist, and he would conduct the abortion on them. When the law changed, that individual, the abortionist, had too much legal liability. There was too great a risk of them having very high fines and going to prison for doing that job, so they stopped doing it. And so what happens now is instead, is if a woman in Texas wants an abortion and she's committed to going through with it, she will order abortion pills online that will come from either out of state or even out of country, and she will ingest those pills herself. And since the way the law is written, since it gives the woman legal immunity and she cannot be charged, there's no one that can be charged in that transaction. There's no one who can be charged for that abortion. And so those abortions are happening at a very high rate in Texas, and then a large number of women are also traveling out of state in order to get abortions and then coming back to Texas. And same situation there. There's not a mechanism under Texas law where they can be charged. So going back to last year and Love Life, I found myself in a strange situation where the legal landscape had changed significantly. The abortion facilities where I would typically go and pray and do what's called sidewalk advocacy, reaching out to women in order to influence them to not get an abortion, those were all closed, but abortion was still a big problem in Texas. And so I had to decide, what do I do next? One option is go, well, the facilities are closed, so I'm just going to throw in the towel and say I'm done. I've done my part, and yeah, there's still a problem, but what am I going to do about it? And that was certainly one option. But the other option was to just look at the situation, look at the problem that we continue to face, and see if there's another way to counter it. And it just so happened that there is. So in addition to the work that I've done for Love Life, I've been involved for about 5 years with an organization called Abolish Abortion Texas, or AATX for short. And everything I'd done with them for a long time had been kind of volunteer stuff. I'd traveled down to Austin during the Texas legislative session in order to speak with lawmakers. I'd written content for Abolish Abortion Texas. I'd made phone calls, a whole bunch of different little things like that. But their focus is more on the political. They're a Christian organization, but they're politically focused. They're working to try to get the Texas legislature to pass laws that would treat abortion as murder in Texas, right? Or another way to put it is they are seeking equal protection under the law for the preborn. So right now, what we have is not equal protection under the law. By that I mean, if one of us in this room were murdered, the penalty for that murder by whoever did it would be murder. It'd be homicide. You could get life in prison. Depending on the circumstances, you could even be executed for that murder. But if a woman chooses to kill the baby in her womb, that baby will not be protected under the law. Even if she went to an abortionist in Texas, even if that were an option, murder wouldn't even be what that abortionist was charged with in Texas. It would be a felony, it would be a steep penalty, but it would not be murder. So we don't have equal protection, and we need to have equal protection. So I began sort of shifting over to Abolish Abortion Texas, started doing some work for them in around December of last year. I was still working with, I was technically in the organization Love Life, but they'd given me permission to kind of start working with AATX more. And then February, I transitioned fully over to that organization, to Abolish Abortion Texas. I'm now the Director of Policy and Operations for AATX, and that means I wear a whole bunch of hats. I speak to legislators, I speak to candidates, I write content, I write our policies, I do a whole bunch of phone calls, all kinds of stuff. And so what I want to share with you guys today in my capacity in that role is I want to tell you where we're at with abortion in Texas, what needs to be done about it, and then specifically what you can do about it, right? Because I know some of you here are probably like, well, I want to do something. If this is a problem, I want to help fix it. So this is where we are. I've already talked a little bit about the law that it does allow women to have abortions, unfortunately. And the other piece of that is there's a numerical piece of that, because you may be wondering, all right, if the law allows it, well, how much is that happening? Is it happening a little bit, a lot? And the unfortunate answer is that it's happening a lot, quite a bit. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of research based on the available data. So looking at the Journal of the American Medical Academy, the Texas Policy Evaluation Project, looking at CDC numbers, looking at Texas Health and Human Services numbers, and amalgamating or combining all this data, the picture that we get indicates that the number of abortions amongst Texas women today are as high, if not higher, than they were before the laws changed in Texas. And so if any of you guys have questions about that, we will have a Q&A period at the end here. Feel free to ask me about that then or later or whatever. Happy to do phone calls or share data that I've collected. But the very sad truth is, despite the overturn of Roe v. Wade, abortion is as big a problem in Texas and frankly across the United States as it was prior to that decision. And that's tragic. And it's tragic because abortion is already tragic all by itself. Every murder of an innocent preborn person is horrific. But it's also tragic because many Christians in America actually believe that the opposite is true. We've heard that Roe v. Wade was overturned. We've been told for decades, frankly, that that's what needs to change. If we could just overturn Roe v. Wade, then we're going to be able to fix the abortion problem in America. And unfortunately, that is just not the truth. We've got a lot more work to do. And so specifically, what we're doing through Abolish Abortion Texas, what we've been doing for years now, is we have a bill that has changed a little bit each session based on, it's refined over time, that does treat abortion as murder. We've had it filed and introduced in the Texas legislature during the last 4 legislative sessions. If you're not already really familiar with how the Texas legislature works, they meet every other year for a regular session or a general session, right? So they're not like the U.S. Congress that basically is in session almost all the time. Their jobs are really part-time jobs. And so most people in the legislature are either retired or independently wealthy or have another job that they're doing the rest of the time. And this, part-time of every 2 years, they go down to Austin and work on legislation there. This most recent legislative session, for the first time, we had a bill that was introduced not only in the House, but also in the Senate, right? So we've seen progress, but what we haven't seen is wide-scale support amongst Texas Republicans who are elected into office for this bill, right? In fact, they have actively opposed it for the most part. And so during the session, we're doing a lot of lobbying. We're talking to the legislators. We're asking them for their support. But then the rest of the year, we're doing a lot of other little things, like looking for candidates who are willing to run against those sitting legislators who would be willing to support abolition, the abolition of abortion. We're lobbying those candidates or those sitting legislators who we think, yeah, maybe they didn't support it last time, but they've shown some interest in supporting it. They've shown that they're sympathetic to our cause, and we're continuing to have conversations with them. And so we have I'd say a long hill to go up, because the last session we only had one person in the House and one person in the Senate who really supported us. Technically, there were 2 in the House. There was a lady who put her name on the bill, but I think I don't want to say she did it by accident, but we were never able to get in contact with her during the session, so we just didn't get the feeling that she really, really wanted to support it. It may have been just something that she felt she had committed to, so she did that. But we really need a significantly higher number of legislators willing to support that. And so when I start speaking about kind of grassroots efforts, this is where a lot of y'all come in, frankly. And in everywhere I go and speak, I speak at churches and I speak at Texas, various Republican clubs or conservative clubs. A lot of times citizens don't realize how much power they have in the political process, right? It's kind of like, oh, there's this political stuff that goes on far away, and I don't really know what to do about that. But especially when you start talking about state legislatures, there's a lot more opportunity to interact with your legislator than you would have with, say, like a U.S. congressman, a U.S. senator, because they represent far fewer people, and a far fewer percentage of people actually know who their state legislators are. So people are much less likely to contact them, right? If you contact your state House representative or your state senator, it's not going to be one of thousands or hundreds of calls that they're getting that day, right? It might be one of a dozen or less, depending on the time of year. You actually have the ability to get a meeting, a face-to-face meeting with your state House representative and even potentially your state senator if you're persistent enough and call enough times. But I've had the opportunity to have those meetings, and it's not just been because I'm in such and such position. It's just like I'm calling and calling and calling, and eventually it's like the parable of the unjust judge and the persistent widow. They're like, fine, I'll meet with you. Just please stop calling. So there's a lot of opportunity there. But what we're asking them to do is to support abolition, or we're asking them where they stand on the issue of abolition. But this is a long-term goal. In America and in American culture, we have a tendency to think about things in really short spans of time. Our political cycles are short, so again, using Texas legislature as an example, it's every 2 years that we have elections for the state house. We have elections every 2 years for the U.S. House, for every 4 years for the presidency. And so, 4 years is like an eternity. 8 years is like, who knows what's going to be going on there. But a battle to end abortion, to really end abortion in our state and our nation, could be a lifelong war, truly. There's a British man named William Wilberforce, who is instrumental in and really led the charge to end slavery in England, and he basically spent his whole life doing it. So the way I see it is, look, if I get to see the end of abortion in our nation before I die, that will be a blessing. If I don't get to see it before I die, then the work I'm doing will have been worthwhile, and God willing, it will happen soon after that, right? So we don't get discouraged by, this session in this 2-year period, we worked on it and we didn't see the progress we wanted to see. We don't think that way. We just keep on being faithful with what is in front of us and what God has given us, and we keep pressing onward. So little tiny victories like just getting a meeting with a state house representative, even if you don't get the progress in that meeting or the results of that meeting that you would like, they're very worthwhile. They add up in the long term. So where we're at today is we had a legislative session in spring of 2023. That's done. The next one will be spring, starting in January, so starting in winter, but then going to the spring of 2025. And so that's what we're looking towards. And so right now I'm in conversations with a little under a dozen candidates who are running for office who have indicated that they are willing to support a bill of abolition, right? Some of them are even sort of relatively near here. There's a legislator named Brent Money who's running in the Greenville area in Texas House District 2, just a little, very, very close to here. I don't know if any of y'all live in his district, but he's a guy who said, I'm willing to support the abolition of abortion. And there's a lot of opportunity in that process when folks are running for office, because candidates are desperate to know what the voters want. They really are. Some of them, they know what they believe on different subjects or topics very well. They're like, no, I'm going to vote this way no matter what. But on other subjects or topics, they're really looking for feedback from the voters. They don't necessarily have a strong conviction on a certain subject. And so if they get the question even a couple times, like, hey, are you willing to support the abolition of abortion? Are you willing to work towards equal protection under the law for the preborn? That's already going to impact their thinking. And they're going to start going, well, maybe I need to do that. Maybe I need to take that position more seriously. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I'm speaking a lot about the very practical approaches to this, but I also want to take a moment to speak more theologically about Christianity and government, about following God and also being involved in politics. There is a, I want to say, unfortunate sort of trend in American Christianity to buy into the lie of the separation of church and state, that our political views must somehow be separate from our religious views, and the two should never intermingle. In fact, there is no real basis for that, other than that those who disagree with God, who disagree with the Bible, who disagree with Christianity, really don't want Christians to be pushing Christian views in the political sphere, right? And so if they can just work from the premise of, no, keep religion out of all of this stuff, then they're winning right out the gate. The whole idea of secularism in American society is a lie. It's a lie that if we just keep God out of things, that we're in a neutral space, all right? Keeping God out of something is not neutral. You're for God or you are against God. And so if you're keeping God out of it, that is a stance that is by default against God. And so take the debate on pro-choice versus pro-life. And one of the areas where much of the pro-life movement has failed over time is by ceding or giving ground to the secularists on that issue. Because what happens is the pro-choicers say, keep your religion out of politics, or keep your religion out of my uterus, or whatever the case. And what a lot of pro-lifers will say is, well, it's not a religious position. I just don't think you should kill babies in the womb. They've already lost the battle, because at the end of the day, what makes killing wrong? It's not some kind of just universal human rights issue where we just all know that murder is wrong because we're humans and we share that belief. Absolutely not. The premise that killing is wrong comes down to the fact that Genesis 1:27 says that God made man in his own image. In Genesis 9, verse 6, God says, if you shed the blood of man, then by man shall your blood be shed. For man is made in the image of God. So God, it's not only clear that human value comes from being made in God's image, but also God ties the prohibition against murder to that specific value. There's no speculation about it biblically. That is why it is so wrong to murder, is because we're made in God's image. We're not the same as animals. In Genesis chapter 8, God specifically says, hey, the animals are given to you, to mankind, to eat. All right? And so what separates humans and animals is not that we know more, that we have bigger brains, that we have opposable thumbs, that we're creative, that we have language. If you ever ask someone what makes humans special and they say any of those things, it's like wrong. Those are things that are products of the fact that we're made in God's image, but they are not inherently, specifically what set us apart. So that's the first piece of the theological conversation I want to get into. And the second piece is, we have a responsibility as followers of God to govern in a way that is godly. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, we see a command in the Bible for kings, laws concerning Israel's kings. Deuteronomy 17, starting in verse 14. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. Solomon. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law approved by the Levitical priests, and that shall be with him, and he shall read it. He shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. So the king was commanded to not just take a copy of the book of the law, to actually write out a copy of the law and to study it all the days of his life and to govern in accordance with that law. And the thing is, in America, we don't have a king. We have a constitution. We're a constitutional democratic republic. So the closest thing we have to a king in the United States is us. It's us. We are responsible for our nation, for our government, and for our laws. We, the people, are. The president is not a king. Senators, congressmen, governors, judges are not kings in America. The closest thing to a king is us, and we have a responsibility to govern our land in accordance with God's law, not man's law. So again, that's kind of the theological point there. So now I want to talk a little bit more specifically and pointedly about what it is that we can do as individuals. What is it that you can do? And there's a lot of different things. But I also want to impress upon us the importance of doing things in this space as individuals, of not sitting idly by, right? Proverbs 24 tells us to rescue those who are being taken to death, to hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. We're commanded, when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was in Matthew 22, and also Mark and Luke and John, he says, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind. And he said a second command is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. He was quoting Leviticus 19:18 when he said that. So this is a command from the New Testament. It's a command from the Old Testament and the New Testament to love our neighbors as ourselves. And we know from his parable about the Good Samaritan that our neighbor is not always who we think it is. Our neighbor is not just the person who resides in the few houses closest to us. Our neighbor is just people. It's people. And we know that people begin to be people in the womb. So we want to love our preborn neighbors as ourselves. And the preborn do not have their own voice. All right? If someone does something to me, I can speak up about it. If someone is oppressing me, if they're hurting me, if they're maligning me, I can say, stop, I don't want that. I can advocate for myself, but the preborn cannot advocate for themselves. And so what I would ask all of us to consider is, if you're being oppressed, if you're being persecuted, if you're being murdered, and you don't have the ability to advocate for yourself, would you want others to advocate for you? I think the answer for all of us in this room is yes. And that's the situation in which the preborn find themselves. They cannot advocate for themselves. They need advocates. And we're not in a situation where abortion has decreased because of the existing law. If anything, it has increased. And so there has to be a change. Another passage I just want to read to you really quickly is Ezekiel 16, verses 20 and 21. It says, and this is God talking to Ezekiel. He's really admonishing the people of Israel about some of the things that they have done wrong. And so God says, and you took your sons and your daughters, whom you had borne to me, and these you sacrificed to them, that's to idols, to be devoured. Were your whoring so small a matter that you slaughtered my children and delivered them up as an offering by fire to them? To idols. In America, we worship the idols of convenience, of money, I hear a lot about of bodily autonomy, the idea that you can do whatever you want with your own body and no one can tell you otherwise. We worship these idols and we are sacrificing God's children to them. You notice here in this passage, he says that you're born to me, and he says, my children. We are sacrificing God's children to idols in America. And so believers in Jesus Christ, we have a responsibility to stand up for the weak, for the mute, for those who cannot speak for themselves. And so there are a lot of things that y'all can do. The first of which is to pray. There is great power in prayer. We're commanded to pray biblically. Philippians 4:6-7 is one of my favorite passages, a reminder to myself about what to do in times of difficulty, of anxiety. It says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Guys, this is something that I hope should make us feel a sense of sadness. In some cases for us, might even make us feel anxious. Give that to God. Because, yes, abortion is a problem that is too big for any of us as individuals to solve, but it's not too big for God. So take it to God. Take it to him again and again and again. I would ask all of you to, if you pray daily, and you should pray daily, to consider prayerfully adding this to your daily prayer list. Pray that God ends abortion in America and in Texas specifically. Pray for the people that are working hard to get that done. Pray for our legislators and our other leaders in government who have been elected, who God has allowed to be in power, that they would govern with wisdom and righteousness, and that they themselves would feel conviction to speak up for the preborn and to enact and execute laws that would protect the preborn. So I cannot underemphasize the very real importance of prayer. The other thing is, I'll go back to what I was talking about earlier, is each and every one in this room has the ability to have an impact on those who are in office and those who are running for office. And I'll give you some really just simple tools you can use to that end, because I think the first question when someone hears something like that is like, well, how do I even start? What would that even look like? I don't know where to begin. And so if you know how to use a search engine, if you know how to use Google, then all you do is Google, who represents me, Texas. That's it. Who represents me, Texas. And the very first link that pops up is a state website in Texas. You click on that, you put in your address, and you hit enter, and it will show you who your state House rep is, who your state senator is, who your U.S. House rep is, who your school board folks are. It'll show you the whole list of all those folks. And in that list, your state House representative and your state senator, those are the folks who represent you in Austin. When they vote, they're saying, hey, I'm voting for you. I'm voting on your behalf. This is what you want the laws in our state to be. And so those are the people who it's most important for you to contact, for you to know their name, for them to know your name. And you can send them emails, you can make phone calls, and that information, like their email address, their phone call, their phone number, that's publicly available. So once you know who those folks are, you just Google them. You can go to the state website that has their information, same thing. You can get their contact information, and you can, tell them what you want them to do. You want them to abolish abortion. You want them to enact equal protection under the law. And B, you can ask them what they believe about that. You can have a conversation. And as you grow in your knowledge on that issue over time, you can, respectfully debate with them when they give pushback about that particular law, because a lot of times they will give pushback. Like I mentioned before, we have the opportunity to be involved in elections. I mean, we should vote, right? And voting is important, but by the time you get to the election itself, you got to know your options have already been limited. And in Texas, as in other states, you have the general election. That's when you have a Republican running against a Democrat. But prior to the general election, you also have primary elections. So that's where a number of Republicans are running against each other for the opportunity to run in the general election, and a number of Democrats may be running against each other for that same opportunity. Now in Texas, where the lines are pretty clearly drawn in every district, you know if it's either a majority Republican or majority Democrat district, the primaries for one party or the other are probably going to be active. So, for instance, there may be multiple Republicans running in this district here, but not multiple Democrats. And that would be because, even if a Democrat is interested in running, they know that they probably don't have a chance in winning. The Democrats are going to win in the more urban environments and sometimes more down along the border and whatnot. So keep an eye on who's running and contact them. They're mostly unknown. People are pretty likely to know who the president is. They're a little less likely to know who their U.S. senator and U.S. congressmen are, and they're almost wholly unlikely to know who their state House rep and state senator are. So I cannot emphasize enough, you have the power to impact that. Then, let's say that you write down everything that I'm saying here, and you go out and you talk to your legislators and you start conversing with candidates and you start having different phone calls and meetings and stuff, and you want to take it to the next level beyond that. I mentioned that every 2 years we have a legislative session down in Austin. We go down to Austin and we meet with legislators down there. And in fact, sometimes we have the opportunity not just to meet with legislators, but even to testify at committee meetings. In 2019, there was a bill, it was House Bill 896, which was the bill to abolish abortion for that year, and it actually made it onto a committee meeting. It's the only time in Texas that has happened so far. And so Abolish Abortion Texas put out a call to folks, said, hey, this bill's at a committee meeting, they're going to have a hearing about it, and there will be the opportunity to testify. And around 400 abolitionists showed up to testify in favor of that bill. The meeting went till, I can't remember exactly, but it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. It was amazing. I think something like 2 or 3 people testified against it. And again, we had, it was 300 or 400 people who testified in favor for it. It was an amazing showing of just how much the grassroots actually wants something like this, but they chose not to pass that bill out of committee at that time. But there may be more opportunities like that in the future. So I've talked a little bit, I've talked about prayer, I've talked about political involvement, right? And that's accessible to a lot of people. But then the other thing is a little more subtle, and it's a longer term, slower, feels like smaller impact, but it still matters. It's just the willingness for each and every one of us to be open and honest and direct in our spheres of influence about this issue. All right, all of us have friends, family members, neighbors. You may be in school, you may be in the workplace, you're in public. And when this issue comes up, when people are talking about the issue of abortion, I want to encourage you, do not be silent. Do not make that calculation of, well, if I don't say anything, I can preserve the relationship, or I can try to protect what I believe this person thinks of me. Do not be afraid of speaking the truth, because people are influenced by ideas and beliefs of others. And if we remain silent in the face of people who say abortion is okay, or abortion is not murder, or it shouldn't be treated like murder under the law, or just even the ignorance of if someone says, man, I'm so glad that we're in Texas and that abortion is illegal here. You might even feel slightly embarrassed to say something contradicting that. You might not want to argue with them. You might not feel like it's worth it of like being, well, actually, but it's important that people know that. How can you fight a battle when you don't even know who the enemy is and what they're doing? Right? We've got to know. Knowing is the first part, and you can help others around you know. And those conversations can happen face-to-face. They can happen online. Obviously, social media is probably one of the most difficult place to have productive conversations, but if you're having conversations on social media, you can talk about this. And if you're that bold person who is just ready to get out there and shake it up, you don't even have to wait for the subject to come up. You can say, hey, I heard this talk the other day. Can you believe that abortion is still legal in Texas? And even though it's murder, it's not treated like murder? We should do something about that, right? So you have a lot of opportunity there. More directly and just kind of the very easiest thing that any and everyone can do right now is you can go to abolishabortiontx.org and sign up to get our emails. So if you're not already on our email list, that's what's gonna, because I'm telling you guys about legislative sessions and all this other stuff, and most of that's gonna go in one ear and out the other. But if you're on our email list, you can actually see when the legislative session is coming. We can tell you, oh, you know what? This specific legislator needs to be contacted because they're on the fence about supporting it, and we'd really like a bunch of people to call them and let them know. And so we can actually give you the information you need to be the most effective citizen activist in Texas on this particular issue. So that, again, there's probably even more opportunities than that, but I don't want to inundate you too much with anything. But I do want to kind of move to a time of Q&A here. And before that, I just want to thank you all for your time. Thank you, David, for inviting me and giving up this time for me to speak. I know that this is a church that cares about the preborn and is desirous to help the preborn. And so thank you for your support of me when I was with Love Life, and thank you for your just continued prayers. Please pray for me. But yeah, at this time, I'd love to address comments or questions or anything that you have. Yes, ma'am.
One question I had is about the abortion pill. How long gestation does that work for?
Good question. So they're supposed to work until about 12 weeks, and the different providers of those will say, hey, don't order this if you're too far along. We do know of circumstances in which women who are beyond 12 weeks have just taken double or triple the dose, and it may work, but it may not. It may not work 100% of the time, even under 12 weeks. There are circumstances where it doesn't always work. Yes.
If it doesn't work, does it cause problems for the baby?
It can. It won't necessarily, but it absolutely can. Yes. Yeah. All right. Other questions? Sorry?
My firstborn couldn't be born. He was a hydrocephalic, water on the brain. The doctor told me if I had known at 3 months, or even 6 weeks, I wouldn't have had the abortion.
Mm.
But I went ahead and I carried him for 9 months. And the doctor didn't know anything about how to do. He went in there and he deleted the fluid from the brain. My baby died
Mm.
40 hours later.
Mm.
My oldest daughter had the same thing.
Mm.
Her baby lived because she wouldn't have it done. He lived. They told her that he may live to be 4 years old.
Wow.
He lived to be 27,
Wow.
and he was in a home
Mm.
for the disabled.
Yeah.
I believe you should have yourself checked.
Yeah.
If you're able to have it, go ahead. But if not,
What's your name?
What,
What's your name?
my name is Dee.
Dee.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Dee. So sorry for your loss in that experience, both the loss of your firstborn son and for your grandson who lived to be 27 years old. You know, every life is valuable, and that your son and your grandson are no exception at all. You know, I would say, look, in a country that values life, in America and really anywhere in the world, we cannot look at a patient who has a bad prognosis, a patient who says, hey, there's a high likelihood that you're going to die, maybe in a day or 6 weeks or a month or a year or 10 years. We can't look at that patient and kill them now. We must not. And so I understand that the pain and suffering of that loss is horrific, but we wouldn't fix that by killing that child earlier.
Okay, so if my son was being born now, knowing that he would be a vegetable,
Yeah.
you would still make me have that baby?
Yes, I would never ever allow someone to kill a child, regardless of what state they're in. And so the question is, if your baby was born and he was already we'll say a vegetable, as you mentioned, would you kill that child?
No, I meant before he's born.
But before he was born, he was already a human being. And so this is what it.
You would have made me, I went ahead and had him, but he didn't live.
Yes. Yes, I wouldn't.
But to this day, then you would make me, regardless if I do 6 weeks or
Yeah.
6 months, that he wouldn't live, you'd still make me have that baby.
Yes. Yeah. I
I can't. I know my son is in a better place
Mm-hmm.
now.
Yeah.
I know he's running. I know he's walking. I know he's talking.
Yeah.
And he's playing.
Yeah.
But at that time, I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I was ignorant.
Well, Dee, I'm grateful for your sake that you didn't have the opportunity even to consider an abortion, and your child's loss would have been no better if he had been purposefully killed in the womb than his death was already. Women who have abortions aren't somehow shielded from the death of their children. Instead, they have had a hand in it. And the women who are given a negative prognosis for their child in the womb and choose to go ahead with an abortion, many of them are plagued and haunted with the question over the years of, well, what if I hadn't done that? What if they had lived? What if they had been okay? Because a huge percentage of prognoses in the womb are false. At least 85% of genetic tests that indicate a mortal prognosis for a child in the womb are false positives. And women have abortions over those.
Okay, I have another question.
Yeah.
If you're going to make a woman take the pill, or if she wants to take the pill, why can't a man do it?
What do you mean? Like a birth control pill? Yeah, well, I would oppose birth control because most birth control actually has abortifacient properties. A lot of people don't recognize this, don't realize this. Human life begins at the moment of fertilization, and many of the current birth control methods, both the pill and other methods, will actually prevent implantation. That means, fertilization has already taken place. You have a new human being who is in the form of an embryo with their own unique DNA. But that pill will prevent implantation, and that in and of itself is an abortifacient act. And so, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say that women should take the pill. Yes, ma'am.
Well, as coming from a woman's perspective, I know it's very controversial, but you said speak up, right?
Yes.
How can we understand?
Yeah.
When we first got married, I planned 6 months of counting days to follow the Christian way.
Yeah.
The 6 months, month into
Yeah.
And I'm thankful we have our firstborn. I found out when I was 12 weeks pregnant. We were excited. Counting days did not work.
Yeah.
It just did not work for us.
Yeah.
So we have our firstborn. After our firstborn, as my husband's very large and I'm very small, I carry very large children.
Right.
So medically, I would require a C-section.
Mm.
With that being said, it takes longer to heal internally.
Yeah.
Intern being saying they recommend at least 2.5 years to 3 years before you conceive.
Right.
So we were down to the controversy, and I know the Christian way is not to do birth control.
Right.
And that's where I think the fear comes from women.
Yeah.
Because you just said it right now, birth control should not be an option. So if we completely do this, which
Yeah.
I'm glad, the next step will be birth control.
Yeah.
Now it's also my life because I am very fertile.
Right.
I decided to go the birth control way, and we planned, 2.5 years later,
Yeah.
we're going to remove it.
Yeah.
We're going to try to conceive. I did understand, medically, prospectively, it could take me 1.5 years to conceive.
Yeah.
That's what I was told. I knew understandingly.
You're right.
So I went ahead and we said, you know what, let's plan it 2.5 years later, whatever God wants, that's what it is. 3 months later, I have our second child.
Yeah.
I conceived. I'm like, well, thank you, God, it didn't take the 1.5 years because we're somewhat in a trying to stay young and still have them at a proper age. We
Yeah.
didn't start too
Right.
So after my third, he was positioned properly. He was also a large baby. My second-born, he was also a large baby.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have, we still have in mind the possibility of a third.
Mm-hmm.
And it just came to, we were at the bed, and the physician told me, do you want to try to be that? And my response to her was, I'm sorry, but it doesn't make me any more or less of a woman, whether I have it vaginally or you have to do a cesarean.
Right.
The point is that I want to be able to provide for this child.
Yeah.
I want to be able to raise them.
Yeah.
No, he would have to go on with life if he finds someone else, perfect, but I don't know who's going to raise this child. I want to be there for them.
Yeah.
So she told me at the bed, hey, everything came out great, but just to let you know, you do have to wait at least 3 years. If we would have tried to be that, we would have gone into complications because your previous cesarean, even though it's been 3 years, was still too close with the lining.
Right.
So she goes, it could have gone very bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I said, okay, so we're at the point at the 3-year mark. I knew I could conceive easily, so I know it's wrong in the eyes of God. I know it's wrong. So we decided to do birth control. And I know it's wrong because every time we do the marital act, it's the same thing as, abortion, I guess you could say. If you want to put it in that perspective.
Well, so thank you for mentioning. What's your name? Janine. Thank you for your comments. And I want to say I'm sorry for the troubles that you've experienced in childbearing and in between and kind of navigating all that. Not every form of birth control it has abortifacient properties. So that's kind of the first thing. I discourage birth control because of the abortifacient properties, but I also recognize that there's a difference in intent. All right, if I eat a food that, if a woman, I say I'm obviously never going to be pregnant. If a woman eats a food that makes her more likely to miscarry, but she isn't doing that purposefully to, make herself miscarry, and then she does, that's not the same as an abortion because intent does matter. But at the same time, if I know something has a greater % chance of resulting in the demise of my offspring, right, in a human who just is not yet implanted, then that shifts it a little bit as well. And so I'll go back to what you said kind of near the end. You said, I know it's wrong, right? This is not an easy conversation. This is not a like, hey, everybody, let's just, happily kind of give ourselves this easy out. But 2 Timothy 3:16 says, all Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness. And verse 17 goes on to say, so that the man of God may be perfect and equipped for every good work, right? Our responsibility as followers of Jesus Christ is to take God seriously and take him at his word seriously, which we find in the word of God. And so when God says that human beings are made in his image, and so we have a responsibility to protect those human beings and to not kill them, no matter how high that bar is, that standard is, that's the standard to which we're held and which we must follow. We live in a society that has utterly and completely normalized a culture that devalues humans prior to them being born. And that's the context that we live in, right? That is the norm for today. So as believers, we have an extra step to take to place ourselves out of that, to start at the default of like, no, human life is so important that I even need to be willing to take risks in order to protect that human life. And so that is, I don't say that lightly. I don't say like flippantly like, hey, you just need to risk your life, right? But I say that all of us need to be willing to take risks to do what we know is right and to avoid doing what is wrong. The truth is about doctors is they make a lot of predictions that do not come true. A lot. I cannot tell you how many predictions I've heard from doctors of like, oh, you can't get pregnant at this time, or oh, this baby's not going to survive at that time, or so on and so forth, that just don't come out right. I don't want to open a whole other can of worms in the room, but look at all the controversy and confusion over vaccines, post-COVID, right? I'm not gonna get into that this morning, but just because a doctor says it doesn't make it truth. The Bible is truth, and we know it's truth. And again, I feel for the situation in which you find yourself, and I pray that you find wisdom from God and protection for any children that you may have in the future. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I had my first, I was very young. I was 15 when I had my first.
Yeah.
Totally against abortion. I went into the family planning to get a pregnancy test.
Yeah.
Sure. And the first thing they want you to do when I was in is watch an abortion video.
Mm.
And it's like, why would you show me this?
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't you consider this? It's like, no, I came in for a pregnancy test. Why are you showing me this?
Right.
I don't, if I miscarry, I miscarry.
Right.
But to deliberately take the child, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I love being pregnant.
Right.
I mean, I was a mother at 15, a mother at 17, and then I was blessed, and we had our first when I was 39.
Wow.
Yes, I had the test to make sure the baby's okay.
Yeah.
Only because my sister's son was hydrocephalic, and it's like, there's nothing wrong with this baby. And then, when we got blessed with Logan, I said, I'm not having a test.
Yeah.
Because no matter what, if the baby has anything, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
He's staying with us.
Well, it looks like we are running up against time. Thank you for sharing that. I'd
Y'all have more questions?
Yes.
Just talk to them.
be happy to.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, the email for what? Oh, to get the emails from Abolish Abortion.
oh yeah, abolishabortiontx.org. Go to abolishabortiontx.org, and there's like a sign up or join the fight or something like. It's a button at the top right, and it's red, and you'll see it. Click that. You can sign up for the email. So thank you all. If you have any other questions for me, I'll be very happy to discuss with you afterwards. Thank you.